there. Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Angel Ito. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. On the show tonight.
Here in Illinois, black residents are nearly 8 times more likely to be homeless than white residents.
The state's new action plan to address homelessness in the black community. And author Chaz Ebert tells us why we should give a FECK. That's F-E-C-K. And I promise it's nicer than it sounds. And now to some of today's top stories. Students at Jones College Prep held a walkout today to support Palestinians amid the ongoing war in Gaza. Now, some Jewish parents and students expressed safety concerns ahead of today's demonstration. The walkout comes amid demonstrations on college campuses nationwide, including in Chicago. And the family of a 10-year-old girl who was killed in a car crash wants to use a deposition from former Mayor Lori Lightfoot at trial. The family's attorney says Dakaria Spicer was killed in 2020 after a vehicle that had been pursued by Chicago police ran a stop sign and hit her family's car. The Spicer family claims the officers improperly engaged in a vehicle pursuit. Now, attorneys are looking to make Lightfoot's deposition public. A day after Spicer's death, Lightfoot spoke at a news conference where she pushed back on the notion that the police pursuit caused the fatal collision.
What we've learned in the course of the litigation is that it was absolutely the pursuit which led to the death of Dakaria Spicer. It was absolutely an utter lack of accountability that followed, and worse.
City attorneys have filed a motion seeking to prevent the former mayor's deposition from being used in the family's wrongful death lawsuit. There's more on this story on our website. And rideshare workers are taking to the streets today protesting driver deactivations. The Justice for App Workers Coalition says drivers are being unfairly terminated and not given a chance to share their side of the story.
Was I speeding? Was I making U-turns? Was I jumping red lights? No one at Uber could tell me what the customer complaint was. How can you determine someone's future? Take their job away with no face-to-face. The customer picks up the phone and says, he did. I don't like. You're deactivated, Mr. Harrell. Why? What did I do? Who can I talk to?
Now, the workers are calling on Mayor Brandon Johnson and City Council members to pass an ordinance providing drivers with more protections. The group also raised concerns about the physical safety of the drivers. Today's rally was part of worker demonstrations across the city for May Day. And also today, labor organizers are calling on the Biden administration to extend work permits for long-term undocumented immigrants in Illinois. Now, advocates say establishing work permits for long-term undocumented immigrants would help address the state's labor shortage. They say work permits would also protect workers from employers who take advantage of undocumented immigrants. And lowering Chicago's default speed limit would save lives, especially for Black and Latino residents who are more likely to be involved in a fatal crash. That was the message at a city council hearing earlier today, where advocates and officials discussed reducing the city speed limit from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles. Advocates say studies show lower speed limits make it far more likely for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists to survive a crash. Traffic deaths have been on the rise in Chicago and nationwide over the last decade. There isn't yet an ordinance for alder people to consider, but the chair of today's meeting, Alderman Danielle Laspada, called lowering speed limits a, quote, moral obligation. And up next, homelessness in the Black community and how the state plans to address it. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
Illinois officials are announcing a new action plan aimed at fighting homelessness and the racial disparities that cause it. The announcement comes after a new study by the University of Illinois Chicago showing Black Americans are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness than white Americans. But in Illinois, the situation is even worse, with Black residents 8 times more likely to become homeless. And in Chicago, while African Americans make up 1/3 of the population, they account for almost 3/4 of those who are unhoused. Joining us now with more are Aisha Lehman, a doctoral student at the University of Illinois Chicago and one of the authors of the study, Sherry Allen Reeves, Executive Director of the Phoenix Foundation, which provides support services to the homeless, Gianna Baker, Co-Executive Director at the Chicago Area Fair Housing Alliance, and joining us via Zoom from Springfield, Christine Haley, Chief Homelessness Officer for the state of Illinois. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So Christine, I want to start with you. You were described as being the driving force behind this study. Tell me what prompted it and what were some of the key factors that you wanted folks to understand?
Thank you. If you go into a shelter within the city of Chicago, you mentioned about 75% of those in our traditional single adult shelters are Black. But if you go to family shelters, parents with their children, about 90% of the residents in Chicago shelters, traditional shelters, are African American. And I didn't understand that disparity and why it was so blatant. If you pull back to the state of Illinois, we see that Black Illinoisans are about 14% of the population, 30% of those who experience poverty, yet 61% of those who are experiencing homelessness. And the dominant drivers, the dominant narratives that we hear about what causes homelessness are around bad decision making or mental illness or substance use. But if we think about the racial disparities that exist, that doesn't line up, that doesn't align. Also, when there's conversations about the root causes of inequity within housing, see that redlining, lack of generational wealth, conversations about homelessness aren't part of those discussions either. In September of 2021, Governor Pritzker signed an executive order to fight homelessness, which created the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness. And one of the first actions that we took within the office was to create the Racial Equity Roundtable on Black homelessness, so that we'd be able to pull together Black leaders from across the state who were, for example, the mayor of Peoria, Mayor Ali, elected officials, community members, persons with lived expertise of homelessness and housing insecurity, to form a roundtable that could answer some of these questions as to what are the actual systemic drivers that cause homelessness and the second highest disparity in the country.
Now, Sherry, I want to jump to you as someone that works in this field. Can you tell us about maybe some of the triggers or circumstances that might lead to someone becoming homeless from your experience?
So I would say the number one driver is poverty, right? Lack of affordable housing. I think that those two things run hand in hand. And I also think that it's dysfunctional by design, right? There are some things that have happened within the city of Chicago with the displacement of people who lived in the public housing, right? When you think about that and the impact of those thousands and thousands of families who got displaced from their communities, those people scattered all over the place. And some of them who could not afford, who got public housing or Section 8 vouchers, couldn't take certain family members with them because of the fact that now they're rechecking and making sure that somebody who had a criminal background couldn't come into the household. So that meant more and more families were dispersed, and they lost their sense of community. So it's not necessarily like Christine kind of pointed out, the fact that people often think it's because of substance use or mental health, but it's not just that. That's just a symptom that happens after somebody gets displaced, after people have lost their sense of hopelessness. What I think that we should be asking is, what happened? Right? What was the trauma that happened to cause this, to have you become homeless? Because it's more, nobody sets out on a lifelong ambition to become homeless. So it's not like, oh, I want to do that No, something happened. Something triggered that, and we need to get back to what was the thing that happened to cause that.
And Aisha, I want to jump to you because you were one of the authors of the study and spent a lot of time kind of talking with people about their experiences. Why do we see such a profound racial disparities within the homeless community in Chicago and Illinois? What would you say are some of those key drivers?
Yeah, so after looking at quantitative data and qualitative data, so speaking with folks with lived experience with homelessness, the main factors were structural, like Christine Haley brought up. So that being affordable housing, evictions and eviction records, incarceration, and in particular programming after someone is released from prisons or jails. Also, the foster system and having programs afterwards to support folks. Healthcare as well is a huge driver. So if you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have access to hospitals or healthy foods or things like that, you're far more likely to experience health concerns, which will affect your ability to be employed. And then employment was the last one. Access to unemployment is significantly harder for Black folks to access than white folks.
And John, I want to jump to you because I feel like we're going to touch on another issue, which is probably affordable housing, right? What role would you say that plays in the racial disparities?
Significant. So when we look in the state of Illinois, we know that there's a severe shortage of affordable housing, and what I would say about that, affordable and available housing. And so when we look at that and what that means, because when you take a look at the report, it focuses on families who are experiencing being rent burden. And so the easiest way to look at that is those families who are paying more than 30% of their housing or their household budget on housing. And so what that really looks like at the end of the day is that once you have paid your rent, you are in a predicament of deciding, am I going to have enough to actually pay for groceries, for childcare, for what I may need for my health? And so even just having any emergency could end up leading to you becoming homeless. I would also say, not only from the lens of affordable housing, but just going back to some of the history that Sherry as well as Christine talked about. If we're thinking about just the context specifically of Black homelessness, we have to think about that historic legacy of discriminatory housing policies and programs, whether we're going back to redlining or if we even talk about more recent policies that we've had with public housing. And it's not only that it's displacing Black households, but in even talking about, the report talks about evictions and it talks about incarceration. And those are similar in that there was an attorney that I know of who was representing renters. And she was talking about how the experiences of the Black families that she was working with was very different. And so what she was saying is, they were not experiencing landlords, obviously not saying that we're not going to rent to you because you're Black. But what they would do is look at eviction filings, which an eviction filing is just a court record. It doesn't say whether or not there was actually a negative judgment, and an eviction record follows you for the rest of your life because there are so few opportunities to actually get it sealed. Or if we're talking about an arrest or conviction record. And we know that many of the men and women who are returning home, the majority of them are mothers and fathers. And so what happens is then they're screened out before they even get an opportunity to get access to housing. So you get screened out because of the eviction filing. You get screened out because of the arrest or conviction record. In Cook County, we were able to get a law passed that ensures that people have a fair chance to access housing if they have an arrest or a conviction record. There are protections in Urbana and Champaign, too, for people with arrest and conviction records. We have, at the state of Illinois, some protections just on arrest, but it does not comprehensively address the kinds of challenges that people are having.
I was going to ask, because you just mentioned what funding looks like. So we know that the governor recently announced an action plan and an extra $50 million for the 2025 budget. Now, Christine, I want to jump to you because I wonder what you think are some key elements of that plan, right? Do you hope that this will, or see this improving the situation, this additional funding?
Absolutely. And we were so pleased to be able to make a data-driven approach in the allocation, the proposed allocation of the $50 million. So the bulk of that funding would go for a court-based rental assistance program to support families who are in eviction court so that they're able to remain in their homes. So preventing families from becoming homeless in the first place. And that work and us understanding that court-based rental assistance was an area that could impact the disparity was one that we drew from the report. We're also investing in outreach and engagement in communities for folks to be able to access Main Street benefits like food assistance, cash assistance, and other medical assistance and insurance so that people are able to receive the supports that they're eligible for. And then invest in how we can pilot innovative approaches to be able to support people as they are exiting the criminal legal system, as they're young adults who may be exiting from being within the child welfare system, and how we can best support people so that prevention is key so that folks do not become homeless and go through the traumas of becoming homeless in the first place.
And Christine, I hate to cut you there, but it looks like we are out of time. Many thanks to our guests, and we're back with more right after this. It's time to give a FECK. You heard that right. That's FECK for forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness. Now, Chaz Ebert writes about these principles in her new book, where she makes the case for how to elevate humanity. Now, the book is part autobiography, part self-help, and 100% what she says the world needs right now. Joining us now is author Chaz Ebert, whose late husband is movie critic Roger Ebert, who she dedicates this book to. Ms. Ebert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Angel, for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. I found myself when I was reading this to be getting very emotional, particularly when you were reflecting on your late husband. Would you say that he influenced a little bit of why you decided to write this book?
Well, the E in the Give a FECK stands for, I say empathy. It also stands for Ebert, because it was his talk about movies being a machine that generates empathy that started us on this whole track about giving a FECK. And then after he passed away, I came up with the FECK principles, the forgiveness, compassion, and kindness. But excuse me, but our life's mission was to help put you in the shoes of another and help you to figure out what it felt like to be someone else other than you.
What would you say inspired you to start writing?
Wow. It's a multi-layered answer, because I think more than anything, it was the pandemic. I had started writing, but during the pandemic, after we came out, I saw how anxious people were getting. There was like a 40% uptick in anxiety. People were fearful, they were isolated, they were lonely, they didn't know how to connect. And I wanted to have a book to help us connect again and to bring people together. Also, I have to say, it was seeing what happened during political seasons, and people are divided, and I just think it's time for people to have more compassion for each other.
And one of the other principles you touch on in your book is forgiveness, and you kind of lean into that based on a relationship that you developed with Archbishop Tutu.
Yes.
And you say that he inspired a portion of that chapter. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
He absolutely did. There are two big things that, two. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I met him in South Africa when I was there for, I think probably for something having to do with movies. We got along very well, and I nominated him to receive the Abraham Lincoln Leadership Prize Award. So when he came to America, we were giving him the Leadership Prize, but we took him to the vault where Abraham Lincoln's letters were. And as he was reading the letters, he said, excuse me, he said, he was actually tearing up, and he said, Abraham Lincoln went through some of the same things that Nelson Mandela and I did. And when we talked about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I lost friends who did not want us to forgive people who had committed egregious acts under apartheid. But we knew that if they confessed, there had to be a path to redemption. You must forgive. You must forgive to take the weight of the burden off your shoulders and to let you open your heart and let in love and light again. And so,
What would you say those steps toward forgiveness can look like for maybe someone that is kind of having that internal battle?
So first of all, I say you must like sit down, and I do a meditation. I sometimes do a prayer on my knees. I do a journaling. At the end of each section of the book, I have journals so that you can write and bring in the person who you either want forgiveness from or who you feel you have to forgive. Make pros and cons. What would I feel like if I release this? You know, maybe it's a feeling of revenge that you want. How would I feel? How light would I feel? What would I do if somebody forgives me? So the pros and cons, and it's a process. But sometimes, I have to tell you, forgiveness is one of the biggies. It's sometimes people have to forgive and forgive again and forgive and until they really feel like it's really relieved of that burden.
What role do you see maybe like journaling or writing down how you're feeling playing in these kind of FECK principles, right?
Okay, I tell you, and the journaling is essential because it allows you to, I call it almost like a virtual reality. You imagine, you almost do a role play. Is that person there? How will I feel if I see the person? What will I say? How will I stand? How will I sit? But the big thing is, once it's resolved, how will I feel? Can I go forward with my life? That's the thing that I think really, and then I want people to imagine, what if everything was resolved and forgiven? How would my life move forward? And I want you to act as if it's all resolved.
That's actually one thing my grandmother always told me is if you are fighting forgiveness, write a letter to that person that you feel like wronged you, seal the letter, mail it off, quote unquote, and that is kind of like that releasing of how you feel and hopefully of that situation.
Okay, but if you write a letter, if you write a real letter, mail it to yourself. Don't mail it to them.
Yes.
Okay.
Important part. So another question that I have is another principle that you focus on in the book is compassion. So you kind of break that into 3 elements of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness.
Yes.
How do you find compassion for yourself with others?
Okay, so self-compassion, one of the things that I talk about is how I had to forgive myself and even have compassion for myself when I was a teenager. I was in college when I was like 16 or 17 years old and discovered I was pregnant. And I was the first person out of 9 children in my family to go to a 4-year college. So I felt like I was letting my family down. I was so against myself. I berated myself and I had no compassion for myself. I just thought, what am I doing? I was always the good girl. I was the one that my family, just so much. My family loved me so much. They were so kind. They showed me the compassion I couldn't show myself. And that helped me to go on. They said, you know what, we're gonna have that baby and we're a family. And that helped me to, that's why endows so many programs for young people today because of the compassion and the love that was shown to me when I was a teenager.
Well, hopefully folks that are watching this are able to kind of understand why self-compassion is important, and if not, maybe they can look to you and the work that you've done and realize that maybe kind of being so hard on themselves isn't necessary, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, the book is called It's Time to Give a FECK, Elevating Humanity Through Forgiveness, Empathy, Compassion, and Kindness, and it's coming out May 7th. And you can catch Miss Ebert tomorrow at Anderson's Bookshops in Naperville at 7 p.m. while she'll be doing a book signing. We're back to wrap things up right after this. And that's our show for tonight. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for the latest in our series, WTTW News, A Safer City, where we devote the entire program to issues of public and community safety. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angel Ito. Have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.